Hi, everyone. It's the time you've been waiting for. Good evening and welcome to the Rare Book Room. My name is Nicholas, and I help direct the events here at Strand. For a little bit of history, the Strand was founded in 1927 by the Bass family over on 4th Avenue's Book Row. Stretching from Union Square to Astor Place, Book Row gradually dwindled as big box stores such as Amazon and ebooks took hold. After almost 90 years, Strand is the sole survivor, still run by the Bass family and still housing new and used books, including some in this room from the 15th century. Tonight, we are incredibly honored to be welcoming back the inimitable, incomparable Roz Chast, who since 1978 has graced the pages of The New Yorker and many books with her strange, witty, honest, and hysterical comics. Her many books include the #1 bestseller and multi-award winner, Can't We Talk About Something More Pleasant? What I Hate from A to Z, and tonight's guest of honor, Going Into Town, a love letter to New York. Named by the Washington Post as one of the 10 best graphic novels of the year and winner of the New York City Book Award, it's a guide, examination, and celebration of the city she's lived in and around for her entire life. We couldn't be more excited to have Roz here with us tonight and to have Bill Hayes here to discuss our city with her. Bill is a writer and photographer who's been named a Guggenheim Fellow in nonfiction. He's also a frequent contributor to the New York Times, among others, and the author of 4 books, including the most recent Insomniac City, New York, Oliver Sacks, and Me, which was named by the aforementioned and recently preemptively evicted online bookseller as one of the best biographies of 2017. With all of that out of the way, please join me in welcoming Bill, Roz, and Going Into Town to the Strand.
Hi, Roz.
Hello. Oh no, 2 bottles of water. Oh, it's complicated.
Welcome, everyone. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here with my friend, Roz. We haven't actually hung out together in about a year, so we thought we would just sit here and catch up, and you guys can eavesdrop.
Yeah, feel free to check your phone. And
You first started publishing your cartoons in The New Yorker in 1978.
That's right.
And I became a subscriber to The New Yorker in 1979. My family was one of the only families, I think, in Spokane, Washington to subscribe to The New Yorker. So I've been enjoying your cartoons for almost 4 decades.
It's a scary thought.
Coming up on our 40th anniversary. Roz and I first met 3 years ago when I took her author photo for the paperback of Can't We Talk About Something More Pleasant?
That's right. That's right.
And it was such a memorable meeting. I took the train to Connecticut. You picked me up. And I remember that one of the first things she told me as we got in the car to go to her house was that she hadn't known how to drive until moving to Connecticut.
Yes, this is true. It's one of the most wonderful things about New York is that you don't need a car at all. And when you learn how to drive at 38, I don't think you ever get comfortable driving. It's a kind of horrible ordeal every time actually I get into the car. I have to convince myself, like, it's fine. Here's the brake. Here's the gas. Here's the steering wheel. Lots of people do this. Yeah.
She was a very good driver, very safe.
Yeah, I didn't kill you.
No.
So.
And we bonded that day, and I had to remind myself to take pictures because we were just
we're yakking
and connecting and
yeah.
playing with her birds.
Yes, yes. Birds good, car bad.
What I remember so clearly, though, we were up in your studio, and I had just finished writing my memoir, Insomniac City. It hadn't come out yet. I had literally finished it 2 weeks before, and you told me you were going to write a book about New York.
Yes,
and you showed me the little booklet you made for your daughter.
Yes.
So I wonder if you can talk about that.
Well, when my daughter was 18, she's 28 now. So anyway, she was going to school in Manhattan, and I had taken her into the city with me many times. We live in a little suburb about an hour north of New York, and I would never drive into the city. I mean, that's just insanity. But we would take the train, and then we would walk around the city, and everything would be great, and we'd go back. But I wanted to see just how much of just the layout of the city she had absorbed since she was going to be living there. And so I was telling her, you really, for most of Manhattan, you can't get lost. This is the brilliant thing because it's a grid. So if you are, and she said, what did you mean? So I got a piece of typing paper and explaining, here's the avenues, here's the streets. Fifth Avenue divides the east side from the west side. So if you're on 46th Street and you want to walk up to 49th Street, you walk 3 blocks uptown. And I still remember this. She said to me, what's a block? And at first I thought she was kidding me, but she wasn't. I think because we have some sidewalk in our town, but there are not what we, think of as blocks. And, I grew up in Brooklyn, so block kind of like, it was like one of those words like a shoe or, like how do you not know what a block is? So I made her, long story short is I made her a little 16-page sort of guide, which is what I showed Billy, of how to get around New York. Just very basic information, stuff that guidebooks sometimes don't tell you. Things like that most of Manhattan is a grid, except, the West Village and down near, the financial district. Yes, it's not all a grid, but most of it is. And that the Fifth Avenue divides the east side from the west side. So 15 West 28th Street is a very different building from 15 East 28th Street. And that Fifth Avenue is the dividing thing. I told her a little bit about what a cross street was and why you need to know them and why they're important. They're not just random, I just need to fill up your head with this random information. These are important because, all about changing subways. These are the West Side trains. These are the East Side trains. Just something that she could carry around. I stuck in a couple little subway maps, something she could stick in her pocket and carry around so she wouldn't be totally at sea. And at the end of 4 years, she gave it back to me. And it was all, folded and kind of dirty. And she said, Mom, this was really helpful. Thank you. And I thought, gee, maybe this would make a book. So I sent it to my rep and I said, well, what do you think if I made a book out of this? And
So your book proposal was basically submitting the little booklet.
Pretty much.
That's
pretty
pretty
much.
amazing.
Yeah.
Another thing we discovered that day is that we share an editor. My editor was Nancy Miller, and wasn't Nancy?
Yes,
on this
Nancy
as well?
Miller
Yeah.
for this
Yeah.
book. Yes.
So can you talk about the process, though, of it evolving from a booklet into the beautiful, hilarious book it is?
Well, originally, it was going to be just a little sort of like a little booklet, but as I started working on it. One thing about doing a book that you've probably found is that just because you've done one book, it doesn't mean now you know how to do a book. It's almost like you have to start from scratch.
You have to sort of teach yourself.
Yes, because every book has its own problems, It's like a little person in a way. It's like just because you had one kid doesn't mean that your second kid, because it's a whole different set of issues. So, one of the things with the New York book was like, if I don't want this to be just a little pamphlet, which I didn't, what do I want it to be? How much, do I want to include history? And then I thought, actually what the book is about probably a fourth of the material that I wound up doing, because there were a few detours, and then I did a few things that were about history and stuff, and then I realized I don't want to write a history. This is not what I want to do at all. And it seemed like every time I got into some, I guess, weeds, you might call it, when I would come back to the guide thing, that would sort of set me straight again, and I would remember what it was that I wanted to say and what it was, which was, basically, I love New York so much. that I hope that when people come here, that they love it, you know? Sure. So that's pretty much it.
I love in the beginning of the book how you provide a kind of disclaimer about everything the reader will not find in this book.
Yes.
Including the Statue of Liberty.
This is, I'm ashamed to say I've never been there.
I have not either.
Yeah.
So I think maybe you and I should.
We should probably
make a trip.
But not soon.
No.
Definitely
not soon.
No, I'm busy. I'm so busy for the next
I've been
8
putting
years.
it off for 10 years.
It's like, yeah. I think the next 10 years I'm booked.
And we can see it.
After that, I'll be decrepit. So, maybe if I'm lucky.
So the book doesn't have history. It doesn't have.
No, it's kind of very personal. There's a few just little stories about food type things, because it's also I was thinking about what I would tell somebody about food in New York. Really don't want to write a book about these restaurants per se, and this is fantastic, and it's just more I really like diners, and
I think we had a diner that day. I went to a diner that day that we met and had egg salad sandwiches.
That's risky. My God. That's
well, you ordered egg salad, so I did too.
Yeah. Oh my God, I did. Yeah. Well, eggs are generally pretty safe. Yeah. I had an omelet today, not to brag, but yeah. Yeah.
So the book is very personal.
Yeah,
we'll talk a little bit more about that. But I also love that it's so pragmatic. And I've lived here for 10 years, and I've read your book twice, but I learned something each time.
That's
and
funny.
I wished I'd had your book when I moved here, because it took me about a year to figure out that Fifth Avenue divides the city east to west. And I actually kind of remember a day where I figured out there can be a 25 East 43rd and a 25 West 43rd. And
yes.
That's why I can't find the doctor's office.
It's funny because you're not the first person I've heard say that.
About Fifth Avenue?
About Fifth Avenue. And but I thought these are the things that my daughter needs to know so that she won't be totally freaked out coming here,
Yeah.
But
Another one that made me laugh. There were a lot of times I laughed to myself reading this book because it just resonated so much, even though I've lived here 10 years. I love when you talk about the subways and say if you're waiting for a subway and it's all crowded and then you see one train that's empty and you think, oh, lucky me.
Yeah, no.
I'm going to get a seat. And you dash in and then you smell the stench, let's say, of
big mistake.
Someone having used it as a bathroom.
Yeah, that's why.
But you learn.
You learn. Yes, you learn. It's
So did you hope from the beginning that it would be a kind of primer on New York City?
Yeah, in a way, a primer, and also just some funny stories. And I think there are things about New York that I almost felt shy about how much I really do love Manhattan. I think for me, it was the first place in my life that I did not feel like my life was this is going to sound so incredibly corny, but it really was the first time in my life that I felt like my life wasn't going to be a disaster, like a real complete washout, because I was a weird kid and had a lot of trouble sort of being a child. I think I was waiting to grow up, and it was very hard. God, it sounds so mushy. And even going away to art school, I think part of it was that I needed to break away from my parents, which is a whole other story. But it wasn't until I moved to Manhattan, to my first apartment on the Upper West Side in 1978, that I felt like I was home. And I don't know whether I said this in the book, but I thought about that horrible, horrible Frank Sinatra song about New York, about if you can make it here, you can make it anywhere. And for me, it's the absolute reverse. I feel like this is the only place that I can live and not be unhappy I think a lot of it has to do with the driving, frankly.
That's really interesting.
Because, one thing about where I live, there's a lot of really cool stuff up where I live, but it involves like getting into your car. And it's just, I can't even go into it. It's just too horrible.
It makes me even more grateful that you actually picked me up at the train station.
See, but I know that drive.
Okay.
I know the drive to Katona.
Okay.
So I can do that drive. But there's another parking lot that is on the other side of 684, and I can't drive over there because I'm afraid I'm going to get, and this sounds nuts, but I'm so afraid I'm going to somehow get sucked onto 684. And
never get back.
Yeah. And like be in the wrong lane, and there's going to be like tons of traffic, and I'm just going to get like somehow sucked onto this like massive highway, and that will just be, I'll be screaming.
Yeah.
I will be like screaming, and then they're just going to have to, have to pull over to the side of the road, and then police are going to have to come, and so I can't drive over there.
So for all of us who love you, please just stay to your regular routes.
The regular routes, yes, I can do.
Well.
There are certain routes I know, and I'm fine with. They're just great. I love those routes.
This book is so hilarious, but also very personal. And I was touched by how you wrote about growing up in Brooklyn and your honesty about how grim that was and how you couldn't wait to leave. So I want to ask you about sort of how you rediscovered New York as an adult, because this book has so much joy. It's so joyful, and yet it's contrasted with what you describe as a kind of the grim life in Brooklyn.
I think it was... The thing about New York is that, like, if you think you're a weird person, there are so many people who are weirder than you, And I mean, like, it's just like Brooklyn was kind of grim for a lot of reasons, but like even like art school, I went to RISD, and there were a lot of people who were very, very cool, and
Art school
is a whole thing in itself. They were so cool, and it was just impossible. And going to New York, it was like nobody cared about any of that. I felt like, when I started showing my work around, it was really all about the work, and that's all I ever cared about. Like, I didn't know what kind of hair I wanted to have. I didn't know, like, I'm going to have an asymmetrical kind of thing, and like my bangs are going to go like this, and then I'm going to have a spike coming up. I hadn't, I don't know. I just don't know. So it was all only about the work.
Yeah. And you have been working prolifically ever since.
I like
You
work.
like to work.
I like to work. Yes,
Yeah.
I do.
And
I
when
like
you're
projects.
not doing books or cartoons, you're crafting, right?
Yes.
I
it's
saw
still
some
work.
of the
Yes.
crafts at your home. Needlepoint,
eggs,
rugs. Amazing. They're really amazing.
I haven't done that too much lately because I have discovered about a year ago, maybe a year and a half ago, I got an iPad Pro, and I love doing stuff on that. And I've been doing, I started doing, the New Yorker has a humor thing on their website, and different cartoonists have like a monthly feature. So I started one, it's called Cut and Paste. And because I've always loved to do these weird collage-y things. And every week with the New Yorker, I can talk a little bit about the process. I sometimes get asked, do you ever get rejected? And it's like, oh my God. It's like most of what I do gets rejected, because what the situation is, it's like there's about 40 regular cartoonists, and each of us turns in what for some reason is called the batch every week. This is a group of like 6, 8, 10 cartoons, different ideas. And if you're lucky, they buy one. Maybe a couple of times a year they'll buy one, like a week. If you're lucky, maybe they'll buy two. That will give you 4 or 6 or 8 rejects every single week, and you can resubmit them. I do. It's not like, they'll never recognize this, but it's like an opportunity to rethink it. If I really like the idea, I can be very stubborn about it. It's like I'll take it and I'll rework it and try to make it funnier. But I don't even remember where it
So
was.
you never
Yeah,
like
that's-
take a month off. Every Monday you turn in a batch?
Yeah, unless the art
basically?
department is closed.
That's amazing, isn't
Yeah.
it?
But
On
it's,
top of books and crafts, and you love it.
I do like it. Well, it's better than not doing it, you know? I mean, even there's times when I don't love it at all, when I hate it, but to not work is worse than working, if that makes sense.
It does.
Yeah.
It does. I have a really mundane question you probably get asked all the time.
Yes.
What comes first, the words or the drawing, or do they come
or the-
together?
The words,
Let's say cartoons first.
mostly the words. I would say 85 to 90%. I'll get an idea, like some phrase will just stick in my head, or I'll get an idea of something, and it will be in words. But every once in a while, the picture will come first. I remember once I felt like drawing one of those end of the world guys, you know, with the end is near signs. And I just felt like drawing one. I was just doodling, and so I did. And then I realized, oh, he needs a wife. And so I drew his wife, and he's holding up a sign that says the end is near, and she's sort of the female version of him, and she just says, "You wish." And so, you know,
do
that
you
was
laugh? Do you laugh
definitely-
to yourself when you come up with lines like that? Do you just kinda
yeah,
giggle?
sometimes I laugh.
That's
Not
good.
all the time, but every once in a while something will really make me laugh.
That's so good.
Yeah.
So usually with cartoons, the words come
Yeah,
first.
yeah.
Another thing I'm curious about is the lettering. In this book and in your previous book, the lettering is so perfect, and it has your personality. Do you have to do it over and over again, or does it just come on the first try?
It varies. It varies. But I never learned how to do traditional cartoon lettering. I never wanted to do that anyway. So I just wanted it to be clear. But
When I read the book recently, I was struck by how seamless the narrative is. And it has the feeling of a book that was just conceived exactly as it is. And I wonder if the process of writing this book was really as seamless as it seems.
no, I think
Okay.
you would probably know as a writer.
Yeah,
Like
as you
how-
said, a book takes on a life of its own.
Oh, absolutely. And there was so it was definitely, in some ways it was much more complicated than the book I wrote about my parents, because the book I wrote about my parents that had other problems when I was putting it together, but I knew where the story began and I knew where it ended. But this book, I wasn't sure, and there was a lot of trial and error. I mean, as I was saying, there was a lot of material generated that I just threw out or saved in a box, and so yeah. I mean, that's what doing a project is. It's kind of, you have this idea, and that's exciting, and you start working on it, and it can go well for a while, and then you hit this part where there's a problem. I mean, I had one problem that was an odd one that I had never even thought of when I started the book, which was that when I wrote the little booklet for my daughter was my daughter. And when she was 19 and at school, she told me she was trans. So she is now my son. And I didn't, so I had many conversations. She's great. He's great about all of this, very patient with me. And I said, well, I want to call you my daughter in the book, because otherwise I have to explain this whole thing. That was a whole other few chapters that went into the trash.
Oh, that's
because,
interesting.
Then I thought, because it started to pull the narrative in this direction,
Right.
that was the book is not about this. Plus, it's his story. It's not my story. Mm-hmm. And it has nothing to do with what I'm writing about, but I wanted to still, everything that happened, the book happened when he was my daughter. So we had many conversations, and I was much more anxious about this than he was, because I didn't want him to think that secretly I was sad or something like that. It was just this is an awkward situation that I never really, and I didn't even know at first do I talk about this? Do I not? Even like now I'm thinking, do I? But, it's also something that I don't think is, at least in our family, in our case, it wasn't like a giant deal. So, and it isn't to me. So.
Well, I think your son has a remarkable mom.
Well, I think he's a very remarkable person in a lot of ways, and he's very patient with me.
What was the span of time in working on this book?
Probably about 3 years.
Oh, wow.
2 to 3 years, because there were, as I said, there were definitely some kind of detours and things that just I had to kind of say, no, I don't want to do that. Pulling it back, and what do I want? And
was this book more challenging than the previous one? Can't we talk about something more pleasant?
There were
and can you sort of talk about the differences?
Challenges. Well, as I said, with Can't We Talk About Something More Pleasant, I knew what the story was, and the hardest thing, one of the hard things for me in that book, was that I really had no idea when I started it, how to structure it. I mean, I knew where it started. I knew like that first thing, with my mother falling off the ladder and, stuff like that. And then I knew where it ended, which was with them in their cremains in my closet. But I had no idea how to structure it, and I'd never done any kind of book like this. And I was getting very bent out of shape about it. I don't even think I'd really started it, done much like real serious work on it, aside from like making notes and worrying to death about it, and stalling. And I asked my shrink about it, and he said, well, what about chapters? And it was like, oh, right.
What a concept.
Yeah, I know. I completely forgot about the chapter idea. I thought it had to be like one sort of like long cartoon. Because I had never done this. And once the chapter idea happened, then it was much better.
I think I discovered that writing my books, that it's easiest to break it down into the smallest chunks possible.
Yes, it makes more sense.
One at a time.
And then you can arrange it.
Yeah.
It's like, otherwise, it's kind of like if you have like a million things in a house and you're not even thinking about rooms. You're just like, it's just impossible. You can't even think until you put it into piles, like how you're like, this all goes with this all goes with that, this is that, and this is going to be how I introduce, and this is going to be the middle part, and this is how, I end it. Otherwise it's boring. And I think about George Trow, wonderful humor writer. Excuse me, I just got to get a tissue. Where it is? Oh, here it is. Where did I put my bag?
Oh, it's right here.
Oh, thank you. He said, structure keeps the reader from getting tired. And, excuse me, which I think is a very good thing to remember. Also, another good thing to remember is something that Lenny Bruce said, that at a certain age, every Jewish woman is going to have a tissue in her sleeve.
I was actually just kind of thinking that as I was
like
watching
this.
you.
Yeah.
I love it.
I know. So I can't do it, though. It looks like a tumor or something. It's too gross.
We are mostly talking about going into town tonight, but
well, you love New York, like
I do.
We're both.
But if any of you have not yet read Can't We Talk About Something More Pleasant, I urge you to buy that tonight as well. It is. I remember reading it before I met you, so it was in like 2014.
Yeah, came out in 2014.
And I read that book at a time when both of my parents were still living and declining rapidly with dementia and strokes. I have 5 sisters, all live in Washington State, and they were really in charge of taking care of my parents. But it was a long, slow, painful decline, and your book just resonated so much with me, so much so that I bought copies for all 5 of my sisters.
Oh, thank you.
It's such a beautiful book, and really, I remember reading it and thinking, this is unlike anything I've read before. It's a masterpiece.
Oh, well, thank you so much.
And there's a lot of text. I mean, there's a lot of text.
There were some things. Well, it was a funny book in a way because, as I was saying before, every week I turn in a group of cartoons to the New Yorker, and there were certain pages in that book that were part of my weekly submission, like the oven mitt thing, which came from a true thing. I was at my parents' house, and I realized that not only were the oven mitts like old and like incredibly grody, but my mother had patched them. And I just thought, like, who patches, like, what is this, Little House on the Prairie? It's like, it's just craziness. And at that point they were still going out and grocery shopping. So it wasn't like, later when it was, hard, a lot harder for them. It was just, but they were children of the Depression. They were both born in 1912. And I heard all those things about, use it up, wear it out, make it do or do without, find a penny, pick it up. I mean, all these, stories. And I remember my mother, I thought this was normal. Like when I was a kid, we didn't buy, I don't remember ever, maybe like 3 times in my childhood, we had a new bar of soap. Mainly she would take the slivers of soap and she'd smash them together.
Oh my God.
And she had made this, she sewed it, this like soap chip bag out of an old washcloth. And that's what we used. It was just, it was like everybody else. It was 1965. For me, it was 1932. So, yeah, it was a little weird.
That is so funny.
Yeah.
How do you know when words are not required? Because one of the beauties of the new book is how you're reading text and then you come to a spread that's just your amazing drawings. One of my favorite spreads in the whole book is Grand Central Station on the left side, filled with people, beautiful drawing.
Oh, thank you.
And then on the right is this sweet drawing of a woman in a box office, like a theater box office, I think.
Yeah.
And she's by herself.
Yeah.
And I loved how they complemented each other and they gave you a kind of a little visual rest in between chapters. And how did those come about?
I think in some ways it's like making creating any kind of thing. It's like a painting or a book. You're just kind of working and playing around with different elements and
just feeling the rhythm of the book.
Yeah, feeling the rhythm of the book, feeling your way through it. And I feel like I try to have empathy with people who are reading it, where I don't want to, I'm not, a monkey with symbols, making everything like really incredibly fun. I don't know why that is fun. Really, that's really not fun at all. But or a seal with balancing a ball on its nose, which is not that fun either. But feeling that if people are reading it, I don't want it to be boring. And, just a little empathy, imagining if I were reading it.
But it also takes a certain trust and confidence just to have a spread with 2 beautiful drawings. And they tell their own stories in the same way that photographs can, I guess.
Yeah, that's the thing about cartoons. One of the things, many things about cartooning as a medium that I've always loved, and I think that I've loved since I was a kid, was that they combine drawing and writing. And not always, it doesn't have to be words in a picture. It can be any way you want it. It's really up to you. You can do it like that. You can have it I've read graphic novels and memoirs that are almost all visual. I've read ones that are extremely text heavy, pages that are almost all text, pages that are visual, all mixed up. But I think about, the woman who created Persepolis, Marjane Satrapi, who said, if you can write and you can draw, why should you have to choose? So, that's one of the things about cartooning that I love so much, and love so many, graphic novels and graphic memoirs, because it's a way of telling a story that uses both things,
I loved that you mentioned that sometimes it's fun to do touristy things.
Yeah.
And I wonder if you'd tell the little story about your trip to the Empire State Building.
Yeah. Well, that was really interesting. I was meeting my daughter then when she was at school, and we would sometimes meet in the city and have dinner together. And I was down in the Union Square area, and I noticed on the ground there was a chef's knife, but it was new. It was brand new. I think they had just bought it. It was in a white, like one of those cardboard sheaths. So it was unused. It wasn't like, I found a bloody knife on the sidewalk. No, it was somebody had bought a knife and it had fallen out of their bag or something. And I picked it up and I put it in my bag and then went on my merry way, and we had dinner, and everything was great. And I told her a little bit about this and completely forgot about it. And I think we shared a bottle of wine or something. And it was just this really nice evening. And then we were walking, and I said, why don't we go up to the top of the Empire State Building?
Why not?
Why not?
Why not?
I hadn't been, why not? I hadn't been there in like 40 years. She'd never been. It was like, so we went, and as I said, I had completely forgotten about this, and we're in security, and and then these guards are standing around my bag, and they asked me, like, do you have a knife in your bag? And I said, yeah, well, I have this little Swiss Army keychain, because I do. And then he pulls out this chef's knife, and I'm saying, well, I found it on the sidewalk, and my daughter's just like, she's laughing away. But I have to say, I had this interesting response to that story maybe about a year ago. I got an email from these two young women, and one of them was Indian, and one of them was a woman of color, and she said, it was not a scold at all. It was just like they were telling me how different it was. Like, it never even occurred to me about picking up the knife that anybody would look at me funny for having a knife, And one of them had been in Europe, and she was with her husband, and she saw on the sidewalk there was a knife. It was stuck in the middle of somebody had it was a soda can, and the knife was sort of stuck in the soda can, and she was worried that some kid was going to get hurt, and so she wanted to pick it up and throw it in the garbage, and her husband just said, don't pick it up, like, if you are seen on the street with this, we will get in trouble. And I thought, boy, that's, it was just really interesting, because it had never even crossed my mind that I would be seen as a threat. I mean, even with the thing with the Empire State Building, I thought, they're not looking at me like hopeful. I mean, it just was embarrassing, and also my kid was kind of, but I don't think they, suspected me of anything other than being a jerk.
There's so many passages of pure writing in this book that are beautiful, and I wonder if I can put you on the spot and ask you to read one.
Okay.
Page. Okay.
I know these chairs are complicated. Okay.
Page 18.
Okay. Okay. I feel about Manhattan the way I feel about a book, a TV series, a movie, a play, an artist, a song, a food, a whatever that I love. I want to tell you about it so that maybe you will love it too. I'm not worried about it being ruined by too many people discovering it. Manhattan's been ruined since 1626, when Peter Minuit bought it from Native Americans for $24. Now my kids are grown-ups. The city has changed since I was 23. Things have happened, some good, some bad, some very bad, but I still love it more than any place else and hope you will too. There's a little pigeon at the bottom. I like pigeons.
And the little picture on the opposite page is exactly the kind I was thinking about.
Yeah, it's just a little kid. You can't probably see it. Just a little guy.
We're going to take some questions in a minute, but before we do that, I want to do a lightning round of questions.
Oh, okay.
Really simple.
Okay.
And you have to tell me the first thing that comes to your mind, and we
Okay.
won't hold you to it.
Okay.
Okay. Your favorite park in New York City?
Central Park.
Your favorite subway line?
Ooh.
This is like a personality test.
Yeah. My favorite subway. See, that's a complicated one because the D was my subway line of my childhood. So I
Okay.
have, but it's no longer the D. Now it's the Q. Oh, it's just so complicated. I guess the 1, 2, or 3. Yeah.
Let's have a round
yeah.
of applause.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
would have answered it the same way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's the old West Side trains.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. What is your favorite bridge?
George Washington.
Ooh, good answer.
Yeah.
Yeah. Favorite museum?
Met.
Okay. And at the Met, do you have a favorite part that you love to return to?
Yeah, I love the early Renaissance paintings,
Oh, interesting.
like Fra Angelico, and I love the era in painting just before everything got really perfect, like when they had some of the rules of perspective, but not all of them, and you just see these wonderful things, like this great. The colors are so gorgeous, but like that pink house, it's sort of floating, but don't point that out, you know. It's
Yeah.
you know, the cow is very tiny, and you know, they're just I just love it. I just love that era, and I love
Yeah.
the colors. I love this mix of perspective and flatness. I just love that. Yeah.
Okay, the last question is, what is your favorite tourist spot? Except for the Empire State.
Okay. I was going to say Central Park.
That's fine.
Yeah. I mean, Central Park is amazing, and as Tony Hiss says, it's the lung of the city. You know, and despite Robert Moses's best efforts, you know, because he always had ideas for bringing cars, more and more cars, and you know, he wanted to put a highway through Washington Square. I mean, if you want to
Yeah,
read an
crazy.
incredible book about New York, read The Power Broker. It is just incredible. It is just the best. And if you don't want to read it, listen to it, because that's how I did it. It was one of the best books about New York I've ever read, if not the best.
Shall we take some questions?
Sure. Yeah.
Any questions?
Yeah. I can repeat it if the people in the back. Oh, yeah.
I too moved to New York in 1979, and you quickly became my favorite cartoonist, and I have been ever since. And
Thank you.
after hearing you talk, I realized it's because you're my kind of weird. When I met this guy, he had 2 of your books on the side table next to his sofa, and I also realized that made him my kind of weird. I often refer to, on particularly challenging days, the 3 realities of death, taxes, and bozo. Anyway,
Yeah.
thank you.
Thanks. Thank you.
Yes.
Yes.
How old were you when you first drew your first cartoon or drawing? And did your parents encourage you?
The questions were, how old was I when I did my first cartoon? I started drawing when I was probably about like 3. And I always liked to draw people. And did my parents encourage me? They were very proud that I was in the New Yorker. They subscribed, and they had friends who subscribed, and they didn't know too much about the world outside of New York City public schools, because that was their world. My father was a high school teacher. My mother was an assistant principal in an elementary school in Brooklyn. So that was their world. But I think they were proud, and luckily they let me do it. They didn't, you know. So I guess that's encouraging. Yes.
I have a microphone that I can pass around. Let's ditch the mic stand endeavor.
Okay.
Give me 1 second.
Okay. I left Louisville, Kentucky, where I was married. I don't think it's working. Is it? Oh, okay. Because I couldn't stand living there. I got divorced because I had to get back to New York. I had to be
Hold it a
here.
little closer to you. Oh.
I had to be here. I wondered, how do you survive and why did you leave? And you love it so much.
Well, I left because I had children, and we couldn't afford to stay. That's it in pretty much of a nutshell. We could not. My husband's a writer, so we both work at home. And even in 1990, which is when we left New York, we just could not find a place, and we knew we would have to. You know, were we going to send the kids? We were living for a while in Park Slope. You know, private school was expensive. I mean, it was just too impossible, and we just couldn't afford it. But one nice thing is I do have a place, a very small little place here now. So now my kids are out of the house, and I live here half the week and up there the other half of the week.
Thank you.
So, yeah.
Joel?
Would you tell us the names of 2 or 3 of your favorite artists from the earlier generation of New Yorker cartoonists?
Oh, I'd be delighted to. Charles Addams was the first cartoonist I fell majorly in love with when I was about 8 or 9 years old. Just discovering him was, I just never seen anything like that. You know, that sense of humor and making fun of things that you weren't supposed to make fun of. And I just loved it so, so much. It was dark, but it was very, very funny. I mean, you think about like Boiling Oil, that cartoon, you know, where the family is up on top of the roof and there's like carolers down below and they have that cauldron of boiling oil. And that was originally, it was going to be a cover, but then I guess Harold Ross decided maybe not. So Charles Addams, I loved Helen Hokinson. Mary Petty. Mary Petty was great. She was strange and odd, and that maid was great. I loved Gay and Wilson. I guess he was in the New Yorker some. He was also in the National Lampoon. Charles Addams was really the main cartoonist from the New Yorker of that time. Oh, of course, George Booth, George Price. You know, the New Yorker was not the first place that I thought. My goal was actually to be a cartoonist for the Village Voice. That's when I came to New York, what I was, you know, really, really, really hoping. I never thought I would be a cartoonist for the New Yorker because I didn't see my stuff there. I just did not see how it fit in.
Didn't you publish some early cartoons in Christopher Street, the
yes.
gay magazine?
Yes, I found it on the subway.
That is so remarkable.
And it was
your first paying
It was my
gigs?
first paying gig, $10. And I remember, but maybe this is very typical when you're 23 of thinking, this is a sign, okay? Because I picked up the magazine, I started looking through it, and I saw they used cartoons. And I said, this is a sign that I have to, because I was starting to take a portfolio around to do illustrations, because I just thought, my stuff is just so weird. It doesn't really look like any other cartoons, and I'm never going to be able to make a living doing this, so I should probably take around a portfolio of illustrations. And I made up this horrible pastiche style of and I got, it's just so depressing. But I was doing cartoons for myself. I did lots and lots of cartoons for myself because that's really what I wanted to do. But then I found Christopher Street on the subway, and they had cartoons in it. And I thought, I need to call them and talk to the art director. And it turned out that even though it looked like there were 3 different people who did cartoons, they were all by this one guy. And they only paid $10, but it was a start. And then I started selling to the National Lampoon and to the Village Voice. And I thought the Village Voice was really what I wanted to do because they published Mark Allen Stamety and Jules Pfeiffer and Stan Mack. And I thought, well, if I have anything in common with anybody, it's probably more them than the New Yorker or, underground comics or whatever. But then in April of '78, I thought, well, I should try the New Yorker. They won't take anything, so, nothing to risk here because they're not going to take anything anyway. And so I didn't know who the art editor was. I didn't know that Mr. Sean was the editor-in-chief. I knew nothing. I didn't even know how you did this. So I called them up and I said, what do you do? And they said, well, Wednesday is the drop-off day. That's, when stuff comes in over the transom. And so I did, and I went back the next week, and instead of a rejection note, this is so shocking, was a note from Lee Lorenz to come back and see him. And so I did. And he told me they were buying a cartoon, which was really shocking.
I think I saw the first cartoon. It was fascinating because it was kind of abstract.
Yes, it was very abstract.
It seemed like
it was
straight out of RISD in a way.
Yeah, it was a kind of these weird little shapes. And I was so shocked out of all the cartoons that they took that one, because in a way it was the most personal, and it was a kind of like weird little things that you do to make yourself laugh,
But
like
completely made up the shapes.
Oh,
right?
made them
yeah,
up.
It was kind
Completely.
of absurd.
Yeah, it was just
wonderful.
absurd, like made up shapes with made up like very specific names, which I still like to do. Sometimes I like to draw people and just make up, names for them. Tuts Henweiler, just make myself laugh. Anyway, when they ran that cartoon, a lot of people really hated it. And I didn't know, because of course, at 23, I really didn't know anything. And later, Lee Lorenz told me, he said that one of the older cartoonists asked if he owed my family money. So, yeah, and that some of them were quite, it wasn't just that the barbarians were at the gates. The barbarians were through the gates and they were getting published. I don't know whether they thought that my appearing in the magazine made their work less. I don't know what it was. It was just, but it was also weird. It was weird because I was a girl. I was 10 years younger than the youngest person. My stuff was weird looking. It was a constellation of troubles. Let's put it that way.
Other questions?
Your observations. Your observations in your cartoons seem to be reflexive and pithy in a way that feels like it needs space and time, not always conducive to the pace of New York. So I'm wondering what your process is. Do you walk around the city with a notebook and jot it down as soon as you think about those ideas, or do you spend time at the end of the day thinking about everything you've encountered?
Both things. I do carry paper and pen with me. I'm not organized really enough for a notebook. But I have paper and pen with me to jot ideas down. And I actually have a box in my studio, which is a kind of idea box. The little pieces of paper, if I don't lose them, go into the box. But also, a lot of it happens when deadlines are very important. I think Leonard Bernstein said that it's one thing that's really important to have is a really good idea and not quite enough time. And I like deadlines for that reason. I think that for me, they kind of, as long as it's not too horrible, there's a kind of focus. So some of it really just comes from jotting down ideas, and some of it is from just sort of sitting and thinking, letting the ideas kind of just thinking and drawing, thinking and drawing, thinking and drawing. That's really pretty much it.
All right. Kind of follow up to the pen and pencil part, because you mentioned the iPad Pro.
Yeah.
I'm very curious, what made you want to incorporate into your work, and what kind of change, or either good or not so good, had that made to your work?
This was the thing about digital versus traditional media. I really feel that this is not even a question for me. They're both good. when I draw cartoons for the New Yorker, when I do finishes, I do them on paper. There's something about the way things look on paper that I like. In some ways, I like the terror of it. That, like, when I'm working on a finish, I know that a finish is like, if they buy like the sketches, it's not such a big deal, because sketches, I tear up so much stuff and I'm always like patching and whatever. But with a finished drawing, you know, penciling it in and then inking it and then putting the wash, and if it's something with color, I do it all on one piece of art. And it's kind of like, I compare it to like doing a live act, like a play, a stage, being an actor in a play versus doing it in a movie, where you're doing it live. And if you fuck it up, you want to kill yourself, you know? Like, especially if this like happens after you've done all of the penciling and all of the inking and like 3/4 of the color, and then you realize this is really bad, this is too dark, and you try to fix it and you make it worse, and then it's just a horrible, horrible, horrible feeling. Whereas with the iPad, there's just not, you can always undo. But there are things about the iPad that it's almost the opposite of my rapidograph, which is I still draw with a rapidograph, partly because I'm left-handed and it doesn't smear. You know, it's so bulky. It's always like it gets clogged and it needs to be coaxed, and I need to like sing it a little special song, and you know, sometimes I have to stop working and clean it, and you know, it's just so temperamental. And like the iPad is like, when I first got it, it felt like ice skating. It was just so woo, woo, and it was just so responsive, and so it was like, you know, it did whatever I told it. You know, it was a very different feeling.
Did your pen get jealous?
I think it did a little bit, but I love them both. You know, I love them both equally.
Another question.
My name is Freddie, and I moved to New York 42 years ago. So this photograph predates my coming to New York. This is you and your mom?
Me and my mom,
Okay.
yeah.
And so I hope this is a question, and then that's
Yeah,
what's on
yeah.
the front. So I'm fascinated by this. Buy tokens at your
leisure.
leisure.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
your is underlined.
Yes,
Now,
not at somebody else's leisure.
now, I don't think we did anything at any leisure in New York
Never.
ever.
Never,
so
never.
Is there any background you can give me about that? Or-
You know, this was just the signs. It was at Newkirk Station, which was my station when I was growing up in Brooklyn. And I would go into, my parents called it going into town. My friends always called it going into the city. Most people called it going into the city from Brooklyn. But my parents called it going into town. And we would always take the subway, you know, because my father never learned how to drive. My mother drove, but she was an incredibly anxious driver. And, you know, the apple does not fall far from the tree. Yeah, so that's it's, I think my mother looks happy. I look like, I don't know what I'm doing. I think I have like 4 sweaters under that coat. You know, it's like, I'm like shaped like a pyramid with like this little, you know, my arms are out like this. It's really funny.
So,
Oops.
it's okay.
Yeah.
We all have so many questions.
Oh.
First, and I'm sure it's not the first time you've heard this, it's just I thought I was going to see like one of the characters in your comics, you know. I'm so surprised. And just the world that you have created is so, you know, you talk, I can see your images, you know, I know like your language. It's just so amazing. It's almost like, you know, you should have, you know, your own type of all those images. And I'm just wondering, when did that emerge for you? Like, I mean, the distinct world that you've created, was that like, okay, so not the first comic for the New Yorker, but the way you see the world that you're able to articulate in your drawing, it's been consistent for so many years. Do you ever go outside of that?
Do I ever go outside? I wish I could, but I think I'm sort of stuck with it. It's what I guess I know.
I think it's like having a very distinctive voice.
Yeah,
As a writer.
yeah,
Your own voice that just
yeah. Maybe
evolves and-
like a character actor, maybe, or something.
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah.
We have time for 2 more questions. One person already has a microphone,
Oh.
so they'll go first, and then the gentleman in the front.
These people have been raising their hand a lot.
I know, I'm terrible.
All right. No. All right. Yes.
I have a question for both of you, actually. I just want to thank you both for both of your books, which I know they haven't been published very long, but in that short time, I've come back to them numerous times. For comfort, I think living here, sometimes you need that New York City cup refilled some days, right? And I think books like both of yours can do that. And so I was just curious if you have some books, some New York City books that you come back to on a regular basis to.
Here's New York by E.B. White is an incredible book. And The Power Broker, for me, would probably be the...
Yeah. I would say the E.B. White book for me, and the E.B. White book, and there's a Vivian Gornick book that I love. She's a very classic New York writer, memoir writer. And of course, I'm blanking on the title of the book.
Mad Woman in the City?
Well, Mad Woman in the City is fantastic. Something Attraction. Fierce Attachments. Fierce Attachments. Really amazing. And the later book is almost like a sequel to it. Beautiful writing, very spare memoir. She was an influence.
I would throw in Alfred Kazan's A Walker in the City also. This book probably answers my question. I think a few minutes ago I heard you describe moving from Brooklyn to Manhattan as moving to New York.
Yes. Yeah. It really, yeah, New York Manhattan feels like New York to me. I know that Brooklyn is changing, or parts of it are changing, but I don't know. I think that I have too much Brooklyn baggage. And
Do we have one more?
I think this person was asking.
Right up front?
Is she? I don't know. Hi. Oh. No. Oh, okay. Never mind. Then she. No. Oh, no. I thought you had raised your hand before. Sorry.
Yeah, let's wrap it up. Give him a big hand. Thank you, Roz. Thank you, Bill, so much for doing this with us tonight. So, I know a lot of you have books to get signed. Roz, is it cool if we start the signing in just a couple minutes? All right. So, everyone who has a book to get signed, go ahead and line up in an orderly fashion right here.